As a kindergarten child, you get to get packed on a dog sled with a bunch of your little kindergarten classmates and probably some parents as well, and get to go out on the land and watch these professionals, work with the dogs and mush. And, even that, the respect that the dog handlers have for their dogs, they treat them like family, at least from my observations there. I was really, really impressed when I went out to see, the engagement and the respect and that almost duality of knowing that, my livelihood and my existence depends on these dogs and their livelihood and existence depends on me. And so, yeah, there was almost this respect that you could see just in the interplay between the dog handler, the musher, and the actual dog team themselves. And again, just really a positive experience for me, knowing that, previous generations, that's how they would have had to travel and survive and really make their way through the North. I mean, it's not a easy lifestyle by any stretch. It's a harsh climate. And if you don't respect the climate, then, you're going to pay potentially with your life.
For those of you unaware, and I include myself in that category, Canada is a massive country. Like 90% of the population, I live within, I don't know, it's 150 kilometers from the US border. So we're all sort of tucked down below. And there's a whole other world that exists, and a big world that exists above us. And so anytime I have a chance to learn more about or talk with people who live in that other part of the world, I'm excited to do so. And in this case, getting to talk to Jameel Aziz, the superintendent CEO of Yellowknife School District, was certainly an honor. And just again, my own sort of curiosities around like, what is it like to teach in the North and lead a school district in the North? And I think if I can just summarize what I found is his description of the way in which they embrace the land and the climate, like probably not many places in the world, I think is exemplary. And when I think specifically about the way in which we're trying to better understand Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous life and culture, I think these guys probably have it right in terms of the way in which they do that. At least that's what I gleaned from our conversation. Jameel is somebody that I've known for quite a few years, and our paths have crossed in different places. And he's relatively new to that part of the world, but you may not know that, or some of you may, that Yellowknife, the city, was evacuated for a number of weeks in August and September due to the forest fires. And so school did not start normally there. And in fact, this interview that we recorded was during the time where they were not in school when they should have been. And Jameel is actually not even, he evacuated to his other home in Kamloops where we did this recording from, but he just handled this with a lot of grace. And I was just so impressed with his demeanor at the time. He's very quiet, very kind of humble, but when he speaks and when he shares it, you're kind of blown away by the thinking that he has done and his ideas. And so what a great opportunity to have a bit of an extended conversation to draw out some of those great ideas as well. I found out during our conversation that he, at least part of his childhood, grew up 7 miles from me in Manitoba, which was another fascinating find and interesting to hear his perceptions of what life was like in rural Manitoba in the 70s and 80s. So that was a lot of fun too. So this episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, Advanced, otherwise known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now on to my conversation with Jameel Aziz. So one of the things, Jameel, that I always like doing when I have my guests on is seeing if we have a shared memory of our first interaction with one another. I have one. Yeah. What's your first interaction with me? Do you remember? Or do you have one?
I do. I remember being at the CASA conference in St. John's, Newfoundland, connecting with you and another fella named George Kuros, and having some good conversation at the conference, and then also a little social time, kind of outside of the conference. But
that's
really
right.
Enlightened me to, I'm going to say, just the level of thinking and engagement that's going on in education that I had some sense of, but wasn't privy to all of it.
Well, at the time, you were there as part of Canadian Principles, correct?
I was there as on the board of Canadian Principles and as the president of the BC Principals and Vice Principals Association and executive director. Yes.
Well, that's right. And then our paths have sort of continued to cross at various, like I think I've seen, we've crossed paths at other conferences and then during your time at Kamloops. But it's interesting because I have interviewed, and I just did interview superintendents who have spent their entire career in one district, moving up as an educator and through the system. And that comes with certain advantages and probably disadvantages. You're not that way. You've gone all over the place. And today, unfortunately, you're not coming to us from Yellowknife where you actually serve. You're at your other home in Kamloops, I believe, because of the fires that are happening right now, which again, we don't want to spend too much time talking about. But I just wonder about how you feel, because you don't have another perspective, how you feel your journey has helped you to where you are now, having worked in a number of different districts in a number of different capacities.
Yeah, thank you. I come from an immigrant family. My parents emigrated from their home country to Great Britain to England, where they did their medical training. I was born in England and, started my school career there and then came to Canada. And, even in my time in Canada, we moved to various places in Manitoba. That's where my parents decided to settle. So we started off in Winkler and then came to Winnipeg. And, I spent a lot of time there. I'm not the person who has grown up with the same group of friends, who has sort of those lifelong connections. I have many, many good friends, and I still actually am connected to some folks from different chapters of my life. But I've always been somebody who, craves new experiences, craves new adventure, craves new learning. I always tell people I'm a very curious person, and I think it makes my wife cringe sometimes because I will ask you anything. And I always will sort of start it off by saying, you don't have to answer anything I ask you, but I'm curious. So, and it has, I'm going to say for the most part, served me well. I'm sure I've made some people uncomfortable at times with, the depth of the questions that I ask, but, I'm a learner. And I think like so many of us in this, business, I'm, interested in going to new places and finding out new things.
Yeah.
And I was really, really lucky that I had excellent teachers moving through the system that I actually, many of whom I hold in high regard and really wanted to pattern myself after. And I had some amazing mentorship from some really great leaders who, for whatever reason, decided to take me under their wing and give me the, benefit of their experience. And I'm not sure beyond the fact that I was curious and polite, that really I deserve that. But it was
Well,
a great.
but I think that notion of being curious and polite, you added the polite at the end, which is, it was kind of, is, I think that's a quality that, boy, if imagine if all of our students left being curious and polite. I never thought about necessarily combining those two things, but now that you said, like, that's actually a fairly, I think those are traits that will serve you well in almost any capacity in life. And yeah, that curiosity. And again, it's not that, it's not that somebody who grew up in one place can't be that way, because that's not true at all. But I do think as you described your journey through life, that nomadic nature, if you will, you're going to have to be, if you're going to survive and enjoy it, you got to be curious. You mentioned, and I only picked that up when you said no, that you lived in Winkler. I was born in Morden, Manitoba.
Hey, I don't worry.
Well, I know you would. So when were you in Winkler? What years were you in Winkler?
Oh, very, very early. So basically when we first came to Canada, my parents had
Okay.
jobs working in Winkler. I think they were actually doing some recruitment in Great Britain. So I was there in mid 70s and then we ended up
Okay.
in Craig. And yeah, I still hold very fond memories. I remember people being very warm and embracing of this kid who came from Great Britain, with a strong
You would
accent.
have stood out in Winkler, Manitoba. I can tell you, because I remember I had one friend. His name was Asad Ali Khan. His dad he worked at the experimental farm. And so, I mean, he was essentially the only person of color in the whole school. I mean, great kid and great family, but I'm sure you would have been in a similar category as sort of the only person of color in Winkler, Manitoba.
Yep, for sure. And, again, people were great to us. I mean, very welcoming, very, my brother and I were there. And I think, as we moved through the system, honestly, even in Winnipeg, we typically were the only students of color in a particular school. We used to go to camps and different things together. And I'm going to say only when, and people always just would have presumed that we're related, but when we would go to things like, a basketball camp where there was lots
Right.
of other minorities there, then people would not necessarily just jump to the conclusion that individual, but it really, I'm going to say, shaped my experience and my view of Canada to a great deal. And reflecting back on it now, my parents worked very hard to assimilate themselves into Canada, and accepted things that I don't think that we would accept today. They were called name, but weren't their name. And I
Right.
couldn't understand it. Like, why are you people
Right.
called name? But they were trying to make it easy for their Canadian colleagues.
Right.
And I
Right.
would do
And
that.
conversely, people didn't know any better. They thought they were being helpful to you when in reality, like, no, that's not really that helpful. But I mean, fortunately, I think we've grown as a country and as people, and we're better than we were. We're not there yet. There's lots of us, lots to learn. But now you're in a community. Talk about this curiosity. It leads you to Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, which is a very obviously remote place. As much traveling as I've done, I've been to every single province. I've not been to that part of the country. And so I'm always curious about places like that. It's in my country, but I don't understand it to that. What have you discovered about living in Yellowknife that surprised you? And this is somebody who's lived in a lot of places. Like, so what's the experience been like?
Yeah, it's been eye-opening and honestly amazing. It is a city in the north. And so, when you fly there, of course, you're just flying over, area. And then all of a sudden, both you land in the city. When you drive there, you realize how much emptiness there is, I'm going to say, around the city of Yellowknife until you arrive. But a super welcoming community. I'm going to say a very young demographic, very diverse in terms of their cultural, kind of makeup and composition, high levels of education because it is a government center. It is the center of the RCMP for the North, the center of the armed forces for the North, and really, I'm going to say, a commercial and service hub that serves most of the outlying communities of the North. And just a real adventurous spirit, I'm going to say. When I arrived there last year, I arrived on a Sunday. The next weekend, there was a half marathon going on, and I certainly wasn't ready to run the half marathon, but I thought, oh, I'll just go and volunteer. And I did. I went and helped out at, check stations and registration and doing different things. And so many great conversations with people right off the bat. And, of course, I didn't necessarily want to tell people, my position within the district, because I just wanted to meet people looking at the side. So, I would be asked, well, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I work for public education. And they're like, oh, you're a teacher. And I'm like, yeah, no, yes, and eventually, yes, it would, kind of come forward. But, I'm going to say a place that Canadians really, truly should go visit. And one of the interesting things to me, just going back and forth for conferences and different meetings, is the level of tourism there. People spend tens of thousands of dollars to come from all over the world to see the Aurora Borealis, to have the experience of being in the North. Last year I got to do some dog sledding. I have, snowmobiled on lakes. I have seen the Aurora Borealis, and it's amazing. Like it almost is one of those life changing kind of experiences that a lot of people spend a lot of money to engage in. And we as Canadians, I think, take it for granted. And in the summertime, of course, the fishing up there is world class. I have come across NHL hockey teams, I'm going to say a lot of celebrities who come into Yellowknife to, you know, either do some photography or to take part in fishing. So if you have an adventurous spirit, if you value the outdoors, if you want to see something that, really is distinct from any other part of Canada, highly recommend that people check out, the North. It truly is a fabulous place.
Well, and like you said, like the summer has its own sort of uniqueness with almost 24-hour daylight. But the fact that you have a city that obviously embraces winter, like they don't try to downplay it in any way, likely means that anything you want to do outdoors in the winter, they're going to do it, and they're going to do it with you. You got to figure out a way to get up there because you're making it exciting. But when you think about specifically about Yellowknife in the North in terms of education, what do you think makes it unique from other parts, like, again, places that you served in the rest of Canada? What are sort of the unique elements of Northwest Territories Northern education?
Yeah, I mean, we work under the Alberta curriculum currently, and we are making a transition to the British Columbia curriculum because government and citizens decided it was a better fit, I think, for the Indigenous lens and spirit and kind of ways of knowing and learning. I came from a district in British Columbia that does really, really good work in terms of Indigenous education, on the land learning, and kind of valuing that cultural aspect. And in fact, got to go with some colleagues and kind of present on the things that we do. But what we do in British Columbia pales in comparison to what they do in the territories. The curriculum is so ingrained kids at every grade level are going out on the land. They're having experiences. They're learning about Northern culture. I'm going to use that word more so than, it is Indigenous culture as well. There's this whole value of really appreciating and respecting the North and your environment. So, kids are out and they learn how to, catch fish and, basically fillet them and cut them up. They learn how to pluck ducks. They get to go out dog sledding. They get to do some, all of these experiences
Hmm.
built into the curriculum. It's funded by government. So it really is a case of, people are putting their money where their mouth is. They're not just saying they value it. They are investing significant dollars to make sure that kids get on the land experiences. And of course, that in turn is valuable to our staff. It's valuable to our parents. And there's a real respect, I'm going to say, for the North and the traditional knowledge, values, and culture that people have. And it's really enlightening for me to see just how much it is embraced, knowing, over the last 10, 15 years, we certainly have made strides, but it's come, I'm going to say, with some pushback and resistance from time to time. And maybe that's what happened there as well. But, there's a great sense now of this is who we are. And they really demonstrate and value that in their curriculum.
But you mentioned something that just, again, I don't know why I didn't make this connection, but one of the reasons that I believe now that British Columbia has I don't know, maybe more authentic lens around Indigenous learning is also geographically based. The fact that British Columbians are more outdoor focused than other parts of Canada, right? And partly their climate, right? Like it's more conducive, especially if you're living on mainland or on the island. You and people move to British Columbia because they love the outdoors. Like that is a huge cultural element of it versus Alberta. Again, I'm not trying to disparage Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, but let's face it, those of us on the prairies, and I'm guilty of as anybody else, I haven't always embraced, especially winter, right? The same way that you're describing folks in Yellowknife have. And certainly, and I make fun of my BC colleagues because I say, well, you don't really experience winter, so doesn't really count. But there is much more interest in the land. And when you said that, it just made me think that makes just like, again, it's Indigenous and nature are way more synonymous and linked than the rest of us think they are. And so if you talk about nature, you are talking about Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous culture. So I like that's fascinating. So as you say that, so then this notion of kids having land-based experience and so forth, that's a year-round thing as well for kids?
Yeah. They happens in the fall, there's sessions, and in the spring, there's sessions, and then it happens in the summer, there's sessions. Some of the learning shifts indoors, I'm going to say in the, coldest part of winter. But, I think it was January last year, I went out with some of my staff because we were taking kindergarten kids dog sledding, and we had to, number one, see the route that they were going to be taking. Number two, get a sense of temperature and, all of those kinds of things. And yeah, as a kindergarten child, you get to get packed on a dog sled with a bunch of your little kindergarten classmates and probably some parents as well, and get to go out on the land and watch these professionals, work with the dogs and mush. And, even that, the respect that the dog handlers have for their dogs, they treat them like family, at least from my observations there. I was really, really impressed when I went out to see, the engagement and the respect and that almost duality of knowing that, my livelihood and my existence depends on these dogs and their livelihood and existence depends on me. And so, yeah, there was almost this respect that you could see just in the interplay between the dog handler, the musher, and the actual dog team themselves. And again, just really a positive experience for me, knowing that, previous generations, that's how they would have had to travel and survive and really make their way through the North. I mean, it's not a easy lifestyle by any stretch. It's a harsh climate. And, and if you don't respect the climate, then, you're going to pay potentially with your life.
What percentage of your students are Indigenous?
I would say 35 to 40%, somewhere in
Okay.
that range. We have folks, as I said, from all over the world. We have actually quite a large African population, quite a large Filipino population, folks who are from, the Indias and yeah, places kind of everywhere. And so, as I engage in conversation with people, it's, always interesting to find out their history, how long they've been there, what keeps them there, and sort of their motivation. But, when I first arrived, some of my visible minority staff kind of pulled me aside and they said, we've been waiting for you for a long time. And I actually didn't know what that meant. And I felt kind of a little like, oh boy, this is, the big thing to put up on somebody. But I think it really was just around, seeing leadership represented by folks who, kind of look similar to maybe folks who don't get to see themselves in those positions of, power, authority, or leadership from time to time. So, it for me was a blessing. And I'm not a super religious person, but I certainly think of, the good fortune that I've had.
That's really powerful. So when you think about your leadership, and again, as we sort of referenced, you're facing a pretty significant challenge right now in terms of just getting people back to the community who have been evacuated. But whether it's this one or maybe another, can you think of a leadership challenge that you faced where you learned about yourself during that time and maybe just discovered, either reaffirmed something you thought about yourself or discovered maybe something you hadn't thought about yourself in terms of how you dealt with those challenges?
Yeah, my previous school district was the Nicholas Similkameen School District, which is the communities of Merritt and Princeton here in British Columbia. And in November of 2021, we had the atmospheric river come through British Columbia that created all sorts of havoc. It basically destroyed the Coquihalla Highway, but it destroyed, communities outside of Merritt. We lost three schools in Merritt to flood damage. We lost our board office. And in the Princeton side of the district, the water was impacted to the degree that we couldn't have our schools open. So, kind of realizing, I'm going to say, the social net that school system is. And it's probably the last social institution that is that social net. We are more connected to families. We know their physical needs. We know their emotional needs. We know their mental health needs probably better than most of the institutions of society. So we are, places of safety and refuge and trust. And, our first order of business, of course, was to make sure that people are safe, just like I'm dealing with, in Yellowknife with our evacuees right now. Then to make sure that people have the means necessary to, feed and, provide support to their children. But then it really became about communication and being a calm and, I'm going to say, trusted voice. And, I had, as I've talked about mentorship in the past, I worked with a superintendent who I'm going to say is the epitome of calm. He doesn't make rash statements. He is always very collected in his thinking and statements. And, at that time I was an assistant superintendent, and I always used to sort of joke that I get to be a little bit more flippant as the assistant superintendent because the buck didn't stop with me, but now the buck does stop with me. And so, a lot of conversation, a lot of reflection around messaging and making sure that, we are not stirring up, rumor, innuendo, or gossip, that we really stick to, facts, kind of working closely with government. But, we are a trusted source, and I think people really look to education and educational leaders to make sure that they're getting good information. And, once that basic needs emergency is kind of over, the first thing that people want is to have their children back in school with that social and safety kind of net connected around them. We certainly saw that through COVID as well. And it really has elevated to me, the profile of, I mean, regardless of what you think about education or, people have different reflections of their education experiences. We are one of the last bastion foundations of society. The church, not everybody attends church anymore. The social community gatherings, people, especially I'm going to say with technology, they're just in their homes and they're connecting, probably to the world rather than their immediate neighbors and community. And, I'm somebody, I like to know my neighbors. So, I'm the person who will walk across the street and introduce myself and go next door and introduce myself. But I don't think that's as common anymore. In the North, it is because of necessity. You're going to need help from time to time. You're going to need somebody to keep an eye on things for you. So I think just, as I reflect upon being in that leadership role, messaging and that calm demeanor and that building of trust just continues to be, I think, the foundations with which, it's really important to move forward with. Because if people trust you, they will provide you with all sorts of leniency. And, I worked with a principal when I was just beginning in my leadership career who told me, if you have a bag of goodwill, if you make a mistake, people will forgive you. But if you are just starting somewhere and your bag is empty, first mistake, you could be out the door. And so, I've really learned to take my time to do way more listening than talking, to value people and really highlight the good work that they do. Most of the accomplishments that I would say fall under my umbrella, those are, due to the efforts of other people. And all I've done is provide them with the resources and the opportunity to really pursue those things and, kind of give them the green light to go. And that's what I'm hoping to do where I am currently, is just I've got an excellent staff. They are super committed to kids and community and families, and they just need a license to really pursue their passions.
Well, that building of social capital is, something I learned early on in my career, that when you can build up a little social capital, it gives you some grace to make those mistakes and try something. And it's like, I didn't quite go well, but I've earned enough trust to say that, that we'll give you another chance. Like I know you mean well, right? And all of that understanding. But when you talked about the way in which you see schools as being bastions of community, again, depending on context, there's lots of bigger districts and places out there where that's what they don't like. It's so politically driven that they're afraid, even to stand out, because they almost want to fall into the background and not be the forefront. But it sounds like you're embracing this idea of what the schools can be for people. And I just think, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that idea of schools as a place that brings people together, because I think that's a bit of a lost idea.
Yeah, and I think, each school community is different. So even, you have a school district, but, I mean, within our school district, we, connect to 8 schools. They all have their own, flavor, their own culture. And so what we do in school A, we may do something similar in school B, but it looks different depending on the community that we serve, and some of those pieces that kind of come into place. But I know the value of school. I know, right now I am being questioned regularly about when is school going to open up? When, how are you going to address the lost time, et cetera, et cetera. It is a real focus for people because, for all of us, who have children, we are passionate about our kids and we want the best for them and the best experience for them. And, to be honest, I mean, the social structure of school also helps support employment and the whole generation of, of business functioning. I mean, adults could not function out in the world and do their work unless they felt confident that their kids were going to safe and secure places, where they're going to be cared for and entrusted and, really embraced in terms of their growth. So in the North, I think we see that even a little bit more. I mean, I am always so pleased to go to any event or function that I'm invited to. And, I often hear that, people would like to see me more. And I'm like, well, invite me because, I don't want to impose myself into, certain situations, but I'm happy to go and be a participant and celebrate, the good work that's happening within our buildings. And I know that people moving forward through education now are just as dedicated as, the folks that I graduated with 30 plus years ago, most of whom are retired now, they must have done something different than I did because I don't even have retirement in my sort of, forward window looking forward. But, it's exciting. And I think, young teachers and mid-career and late career teachers are still passionate about kids. They're still passionate about families. They're passionate about, you know, helping with the growth, the mental health, the, overall disposition. And, we want positive experiences. Even though I've spent some time in some districts longer than others, for the most part, I was in a school 2, 3 years at best. In fact, I only had 1 3 tenure in a school. I was 5 years as the assistant soup in my previous district. That was it. For the most part, I kind of got to move to different school communities and make connections with kids. And, I have former students now who are city councilors, who are political leaders, who are business leaders. And it's interesting to know that maybe you were a part of helping to foster that. And my connection with, those people through Facebook or Instagram would suggest that there was some impact that occurred there. And I just think that's, so valuable, so exciting. I mean, as public educators, none of us got into this to become rich, but there is a richness in the work that we do. And I think the impact that we have that is just immeasurable. And I feel a great sense of pride and a great sense of connection, just knowing that I was part of that system.
I often think about how will we measure our legacy when we decide that we're finished, and it's difficult. I mean, I always felt like at times we would take too much credit when people succeeded and took too much blame when people didn't. And the truth of it is we are just one cog in the wheel of a kid's life, right? And we just want to make sure that the time we have with them impacts them in a positive way, and to be able to see kids, you know, grow up to be successful humans. We can't we can't take all the credit for that, for sure. But it is, like you said, it's nice to be able to say, and especially when there's some, acknowledgement of, hey, I remember you as a teacher, and I remember the time we had, and I appreciated who you like. I mean, and they don't come very often when we hear those things, given all of the people that we would serve over our careers, but they certainly are important. But anyways, I just so appreciate your lens around leadership. I think you have so many outstanding qualities that I just think our Yellowknife is grateful to have you. But before we sort of wrap up our time together, I want to just sort of dive into what I call the fun questions. I don't know if they're that how fun they are, but they're more just the Jameel, the human side of things. What are you, if you are, what are you reading or listening to? Some people are big podcasters. Some people are just straight old books. Maybe people are mixed. What's been sort of, what have you been consuming lately on that end?
Yeah, so my wife is a podcaster for sure. I haven't, engaged to the same degree that she has, but what I found myself recently when I was a younger man, I used to get a lot of books from friends. I had books, kind of through university. I'm an English major, and one of my majors through university. I've run back to reading, Salman Rushdie short stories and great Canadian authors, because I know even through my course of being an English student and English teacher, you see things differently when you read the same piece of literature at different times in your life. And so what I reflect upon, had
Interesting.
a certain short story or a certain book at a certain time, it's different now because now I have these years. I'm a father, I'm a husband. I look at it differently, than I would as at the time. And, I remember reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as a child. I remember reading it in high school and having a very different lens to it. I remember reading it again in university as part of study and again having a different lens. And so I'm just actually just rediscovering and reconnecting with things that I really enjoyed and valued and felt kind of immersed in 30 years ago. And it's really exciting to me. And of course, I remember the people who gave me the books,
Hmm.
conversations we had around, the books. And, it makes me reflect on so many of the wonderful people that I've made connection to through the course of my life. And not that I'm in touch with all of them anymore, but I'm one of those people who truly believes just because somebody's in your life for a chapter, it doesn't mean it wasn't amazing. It just means that it was that chapter and then it
Yeah.
disappeared. And so yeah, makes me look them up on Facebook or kind of reach out and just sort of want to see how they're doing. But I'm trying to learn, kind of through that lens. And then of course, when I go to conferences, you meet amazing speakers, many of whom have written, some fantastic books. And I just try to connect, with some of those as well to stay topical. But I'm going to say some of my staff are far more voracious. I have an assistant superintendent. She's a voracious reader and she will give me things to read as well, which I just really, really appreciate because,
Yeah.
my eyes aren't as sharp as they used to be. I need a little bit more light to read the book so that I still enjoy the experience of reading and holding a book and having a book. And, I'm a library guy. So I still remember my father taking us to the public library and, taking out 6, 8 books at a time and devouring them. And then 2 weeks later, you take them all back and you get a new set. And it excited me. And, my children engage in learning and literature in different ways, but I think they're still excited by the same things that they're connecting to.
So with that, I don't know. Like maybe this is the fair. Like, what about like binging any kind of streaming services? That you shared this high level intellectual literature piece around you. I don't know if it allows you time to go to the other end of the spectrum where something may. And again, maybe there's a lot. And I say that facetiously because I think there's a lot of really high quality streaming shows out there that are as complex and interesting as a lot of literature. But whatever, I don't know. What are you watching? I guess is just the basic question here.
Well, I don't get to watch a ton of TV, but I have two things that I will call more relaxing engagement. I'm a Coronation Street fan, so I watch Coronation Street immediately because I grew up with Coronation.
Goodness.
I still am connected to all of the episodes and the very
Wow.
I know connected to Coronation Street. We have regular conversations around it. So after three what are my mergers, and then I watched this really, and I don't call it a terrible show called 90 Day Fiance. It's on the TLC, I think, and it's about these people who meet people from overseas, and then they seem to always have
Right.
these relationships and lots of fights. But it's just really worthwhile kind of
Yes.
real world sort of humor, and yeah, I enjoy that.
Sometimes you need that.
Yes, and
Sometimes you just need that. That's fine, dude. Oh, that's that like the Coronation Street. That kind of blows me away because like I would flip. I mean, okay, for people, and you're probably old enough to remember. But there was a before cable time when there were only 2 channels or 3 channels, and Coronation Street was a staple of CBC. And I would go, and I couldn't figure out. I mean, just what? But the fact that you're what that's amazing. I think that is totally amazing. Now, my last question is, and you can speak to this. We'll go with Yellowknife since we're on that stage. I know you have another home in Kamloops as well, but If I were to go to Yellowknife, and I mean, you kind of address some of those things, but like maybe something that wouldn't come up on the first Google, like a little bit more of a hidden gem of like, a lot of people might not know this about Yellowknife, but here's a good restaurant, tourist spot, park, place, activity. What would you recommend?
Yeah, so there is, and I think it probably does come up, but there's a fish and chip place called Bullock's. It literally is an old shack, I would call it, for lack of a better description. It's pretty famous within Yellowknife, but it's fresh caught fish. So it's fish that's literally caught from Great Slave Lake. Having been in Manitoba, I've had pickerel and trout before, but this northern pickerel and trout, it's totally different. It's huge. I mean, you get these huge, fabulous pieces of fish with fries and an interesting ambiance. And I mean, you're not going there for, amazing views or anything like that, but it's, just a fabulous spot. And I'm going to say probably some of the best fish and chips you're going to get anywhere in the world. There's another neat little restaurant that has been opened up by a very young chef. It's called Fishy People. And everything that she makes is fish based. So she will make like a charcuterie plate, but all of the sausage, all of the stuff on the plate is, kind of fish based. And she has her own little garden outside in the summertime. And so kind of uses those herbs and wines. But I've had some really great meals there. The trail and nature system in Yellowknife actually is probably second to none. So if you're a hiker, if you're a walker, there's going to be all sorts of outdoor activities for you to engage in. I'm going to say that every recreational or athletic pursuit that you would want to engage in exists there as well. And there's probably a very robust and active community, who kind of want to connect to those things. And then also a really big fine arts community. I mean, the painting, drawing, sculpture, knitting, quilting, I just, not that I'm engaged in all of those things, but I hear about all of those kinds of things.
Hmm.
So I'm going to say that there's a fit for everybody up there. I mean, Aurora College is across the street from our board office, and I, go there in the fall and kind of chat with students about a variety of things. And, they have clubs for board games and for, people who like to paint tiny little, figurines and then, reenact certain things with them. And so there just are, an amazing kind of thing to do. Growing up as a tourist, depending on the time of year, you have to get out a little bit outside of the city limits to see the aurora borealis. Just when you're out, on the land and the aurora is really flaring up, I mean, there's a sound that it makes that I don't, it can't be replicated. And I'm going to say, for a lot of people, it's almost a religious type of experience. And then just go and connect with some locals. I mean, there are tons of folks there who have been there a long time, who have great stories, who are very proud of their community, and would be happy to show you around and really share some, great history and images of the community. And it continues to grow. And I think the Yellowknife is, had I known the Yellowknife existed and the opportunities that were there 20 years ago, I might have gone there 20 years ago, but I really was not aware, of all the fabulous things that were happening there.
Well, I don't know if you're moonlighting for Tourism Yellowknife or if that's a second career you have in mind, but you've done an amazing job of selling it. And it sounds like it's not that hard to sell at the end of the day anyway. So anyway, well, what a fabulous conversation, Jameel. You share so many enlightening ideas and insights and just what a delight it was to spend time with you. So thank you so much for your time and all the best as you begin a pretty challenging school year. Hopefully it's very, very soon. People will be back in the city and you'll be back and things will get back to normal.
Yeah, thank you. We're keeping our fingers crossed. I mean, our focus now is just making sure everybody's safe. And, we were hopeful to be back soon, but, wind and Mother Nature, sometimes they have other ideas. And so
Yeah.
just have to respond and, kind of move through with that. Always a pleasure to chat with you. And, I wish you my very best as well with your, future enlightenment. And I hope our paths will cross again soon one day.
Absolutely.